Hello everybody and welcome back to You Can't Win. This is Tom here and I'm joined by Don as usual. Today it's just going to be the two of us, and with the election, the American election coming up, I don't know, figured we should talk about that a little bit. I don't think we're going to break down all the specific, the policy plans and the polls and blah, blah, blah. There's plenty of people you can go to for that kind of thing, and that's not really what we're interested in here. But I think we will be talking a little bit just around the way people are reacting to this election, because it's been such a crazy year, and, why not just throw presidential election into the mix that, just sort of seems to fit. So, a lot of the big, gotta vote, voting, it's the most important thing, it's the most important election in the whole world, that kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
And, people are taking it real serious, and, I don't know, it just seems something that we ought to discuss. So I know I got harangued a little bit the other day about not voting, so I'm not going to vote, mainly out of laziness. I don't really care that much. So yeah, so that was pretty much my response. Someone just sort of casually asked me if I was going to vote or not, and if I was registered, and I said, nah, I'm not even sure if I am registered. I don't think I am, but if I am registered, it would be either here in Illinois, a blue state, or in Washington, a blue state. So I was like, the person I was talking to was a Biden supporter. So I was like, it's not going to affect anything. I'm not in a battleground state or whatever they're called. So yeah, it's whatever to me. And, they got kind of upset, and they were just like, oh, it's so important. You got to vote. It's really important that you do that. And I was just kind of saying, well, I just don't like either candidate. I'm not motivated enough by anything they're offering to kind of push me one way or the other. So I'm, just not bothering with it. And, they got into kind of some pretty silly arguments about, oh, but Trump's so bad, he's always in the news. It's like, well, yeah, well, he is. He's always in the news and gave tax cuts to billionaires. Well, I was like, okay. And what American president hasn't done that? Just go down the line, like Obama in 2008 and George Bush in 2000 or whatever it was.
Mm.
And I don't know, it just sort of struck me, the whole the way people get really have these blinders on. It's like the only the past month or so existed. I remember a few months ago, the same person was really iffy about Biden and was sort of leaning towards a Warren Bernie kind of a thing.
Yeah. And
now it's just diehard Biden Harris, Yeah. And it's just I don't know. I respect this person a lot. They're generally very intelligent and stuff, and I don't even think they're being, it's not stupid exactly. It's just, people just get suckered into this stuff. It's really a shame.
So, I mean, have you ever voted?
Yeah, I voted for Obama the first time.
Okay. So is it see, it's different how it works there in terms of registration and all that. So you're gone now, right? You're not registered or anything or.
Yeah, I don't think I can. I mean, I think there's some sort of stuff you can do that is way more trouble than it's worth for someone who's not really interested in the first place.
Sure. So it's not there's not lower level ballot stuff that you care about either. Because that's the other thing, is that your ballots are huge, aren't they? Generally, you get a bunch of different things you have to vote for. Or...
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm the wrong person to ask about this, but yeah, I think that's the case. I know Tabs is sort of, considering that kind of thing. She's feeling very similarly to me about the presidential stuff, but in terms of local things, it's well, maybe there's something there that's worth looking into. But I don't know. Chicago is is that really going to be that different from? I figured the whole. Everyone who's involved in Chicago politics is highly corrupt, basically. I just figure that there's no real oh wow, this person's going to do that. That's amazing. I'm definitely voting for them. I don't know. Maybe there is. We did get something in the mail the other day that was about some sort of tax that was supposed to. I guess there's some flat tax thing in some kind of way that they want to end and make it a progressive tax or something like that. So, okay, seems fine, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I enjoy doing the like little formality stuff of all that, like all the checking the box and everything and doing all that. But for me in Canada, it's a lot different, I think, because it takes like I go to their office usually, like the elections office. You can just go there for like the month before the election or something, or like for a while, and just they'll give you a ballot and you can just do it then, kind of thing. So if you're like at the mall, you can just go there and do it, and it'll take 5 seconds. There's not like a long line or anything, and it's like all retirees there just like hanging out. So it's like it's a very pleasant experience. and then there's like maybe 5 names on the ballot and you just choose one. So it's not like 10 questions about like, do you think that this bond should be issued to buy textbooks for private schools in this county or something? You know, it's not like that kind of stuff. It's just, you know, you take your 2 seconds and then, you know, they take your ballot and then they throw it in the garbage, basically. Like, you know what I mean? Like they do all that. They do that. And then it doesn't really matter because I live in an area that, you know, it flips between the liberals and the conservatives maybe, but mostly conservative now. So, but yeah, so I don't know. It's funny because you get hectored online with all this stuff, just constantly this vote stuff. And I feel in my person somewhere that like I'm supposed to be doing something, even though I'm Canadian. You know what I mean? Like there's some impulse there. It's like, am I supposed to be registered? Is there something, you know, when do I get my ballot kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And if it's that level of pressure on me and I'm not even, you know, then I got to wonder what it is for a lot of Americans. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. To me, it's like, it's not that, as I said, I kind of like it, like the formality of all that. It's like very minorly bureaucratic or something. It satisfies me. But
Sure.
The mathematics of it is not really heavily in the favor of voting in terms of like it being the be all and end all. The difference I would say would be like money. Like if you had like, you know, a large amount of money in the bank and you could give like a few $1,000s to a state Senate candidate or something, you know, then you can make a huge difference because, you know, that might be enough for them to hire a staffer for a week and then that person might organize a few hundred people to vote or something, right?
Right.
Like it's not
but that's usually the problem, right? The people with money have.
yeah. It is the problem. But I just mean that like in terms of, because you kind of have to think in terms of the actual consequences of your vote. That's not what anyone does. Almost everyone has this idea that like your vote is somehow a reflection of your inner soul or something, you know, like that you're showing up at the polls and being like some wise judge or something deciding between 2 people and then it's the deciding factor instead of, you know, and at the end of the day, I don't really know what you're going to ever get. Like if you've got like, say maybe 200 million adults in the US or like 150, whatever, you know, like you're never going to have a system where 200 million people have a meaningful say on, you know, every issue of the, you know, it just won't work. It just won't happen. Right. Like it's like you might have something where there's a better consensus or something, or like there's better outcomes for people, but it's not like you're never going to get to the point where everyone is like, yep, we all voted and we all feel good about what we did. You know what I mean? It's not like you're never going to get to that point where somehow. So I think that's also one of the critiques kind of either way that people kind of get led astray on maybe, is that like they think, oh, I'm not voting because it doesn't feel like I have an impact and maybe there's some other like anarchist system or something where I would feel like that. And I'm like, no, I mean, even if like you've had to pick a place to go to eat with 10 people or something, you know, you kind of pretty quickly, you kind of realize how much you have to compromise and, you know, decide on, you know. Like
you're right.
It's not going to be something where, you know, if you're trying to decide all of production and consumption in a country, you're going to have some sort of decentralization or something. So,
yeah, and in some way, it's like let the people who actually control that stuff make those decisions. I guess, like if those are the people who control it, well, I mean, let them make the decisions. I don't know, what does that have to do with me? I'm just here trying to, you know, make a living and stuff. I don't know. This has nothing to do with me. You guys set up the economy. I'm just here to mess around in it, I guess. I had this like image pop into my head while you were talking of like a Family Guy style cartoon, and it's us like in ancient Mesopotamia, and people are like lined up bringing their like sheep and stuff to some sacrificial altar and whatever, and we're just like talking about, this is stupid, no one's gonna, what are you doing this? Like,
yeah. Although, I mean, I think there probably are better models in terms of like, each sort of interest group or community being able to have big representative organizations like labor federations or something where, then they can kind of clash together in giant blocks kind of thing, and then instead of like having to pick which extremely rich, angry person that you want, you could just be like, I mean, like there has to be some sort of flow upwards from interest groups or power blocks and stuff where it's, negotiations between, relatively normal people, maybe. I don't know. But like, that's not something you can just kind of wish into existence. You can't just go, that's how it should work. Therefore, I don't know, like someone.
Sure. Yeah. I guess. I mean,
yeah.
You can't, it really depends how much you are invested in that, because that's such a big thing to move.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, yeah, it's probably the right thing to do is to get involved in some sort of, get things moving on some level, because you can't just sit around and wait, I guess. But
well, I don't even mean like this around and wait, just in terms of like, ideally it would be good if, say, instead of these, personalities competing out in, trying to be like, I'm the best because I'm, like Elizabeth Warren being like, I'm a genius, or like Bernie Sanders being like, I'm like a tough fighter for you, or whatever.
Yeah.
It'd
or
be
Biden
better
being
if,
like, you're not black.
yeah. But it'd be good if there was just like, negotiations between people that actually, I mean, like that you're like your work somewhere, then therefore you pay a lot of dues into your union or something, then the union represents you effectively, and they're like, they're like, oh, we have to pick someone for president who's gonna actually listen to the unions because they're so powerful. I think like that kind of makes more sense in theory, at least, but yeah, you have to have like all the steps that lead into that, including all the organizing that happens to get there. It's not like I don't know. It's just right now. I mean, it just sucks. Like it's just there's no like all it is really. I mean, the only choice you really do have right now is like whether or not you prefer Biden or Trump, and they very carefully make sure that that's the framing, right? Like it's not like So, anyways, I don't.
Can you imagine though, like if the U.S. system was actually transparent and it, like we could just see the actual decision making and stuff, like the actual parties involved in things like black ops mercenary groups debating around with like the data people, the big tech data folks, and they're kind of like, we want this policy, and then they kind of like, well, it's going to cut into our thing, so you got to give us this or whatever, and just like kind of moderating and supervising it all is like this APAC lobbyer. They're just kind of like, they have a veto power over everything. And the mafia is sitting there kind of like, make sure you cut us in or it's going to be problems.
Yeah.
That would be kind of fun, at least. I guess that's what like Trump's whole appeal is. It brings a little bit of that flavor to things.
Yeah. It's like a mafia sit down presidency or something. So
yeah.
But that's one of the sort of dangers of the whole Biden thing, is that his whole kind of message is, can we at least pretend it's like in the books kind of thing? Like that's his whole selling thing is, can we well, let's at least pretend there's a constitution and all that stuff that you read about in 10th grade or whatever, like that's kind of his appeal. That might not necessarily be, it might be better in some ways to just keep going down the road of getting rid of all of those illusions. But I don't know. There is some risk in that, but yeah. I don't know. Right,
because like at some level, those illusions do have like a function in maintaining cohesion in society, and that is a real thing. Yeah, it's funny, you mentioned that. That's sort of one of the arguments that the Biden person had brought up to me was about voting. Was like, well, even if it is kind of meaningless, I'd rather vote than not, just so I don't feel powerless, because like my family came from a communist country, and they really had no power. And I was like, if I'm just a serf, that's fine. Like, and even if I, the whole playing the game doesn't change that. Like, it doesn't, I don't know. I'm fine with it, whether it doesn't like affect my life to pretend, you know what I mean? I just don't understand the willful kind of like buying into it just because it's like, I'd rather not feel powerless. Well, you are though. I just don't get that.
I don't know. I kind of have moved a little bit towards that direction though in the last few years, just because looking at how bad things are in the United States, I kind of look at Canada and go, thank God we have at least some minimum, stuff. Like we've got our healthcare system is better in a lot of ways. Like I can't imagine getting sick right now and not being able to just go to the doctor without thinking about the price and stuff like that. Like just and a lot of things like that. And, I was thinking of it in that Mayor of Canada way that we talk about sometimes, like that, that like it's, the NDP here is like we've got like a social democratic party, which is not good. I mean, like whenever it gets into power, it doesn't do much. And at the provincial level, and like it's never really been in power. At the federal level, it just does, things at the edges basically. But it's so much better, at least having them there, kind of thing, than in the States.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's just nice to be able to, like a lot of the time they'll do dumb stuff about small businesses and how we have to, balance the budget or whatever. They're wrong a lot of the time. But the fact that sometimes they're there and saying stuff like, privatization is bad or something, it's the same thing for like with Bernie and Corbyn and all that kind of stuff, where it's like, it's so much nicer just hearing someone on television sound somewhat reasonable sometimes. I mean, that's a pretty low bar and it's not going to get you that far, but I don't know. It makes me feel a bit more sane at least than I did for before that, when it's like terrible things happening all the time. And then you're like, the people who are supposed to be on your side just don't even sound reasonable or something. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that. I just feel like on some level, all this is like none of my business somehow. It feels like kind of like a busybody kind of thing. Like I'm getting involved in some rich family next door or something. It's like, let them sort out their own problems. It has nothing to do with me. If I just ignore all of this, it goes away. Life goes on. Yeah. I don't know.
So, I mean, in my like teen years and then early 20s and stuff, I felt like the opposite. I felt like I'm going to go to Ottawa and I'm going to learn, how to do politics, and then I'll become like a policy guy and, do that for years in conservative and then liberal kind of stuff. Like I thought, I thought I was like the roller backpack kid on that kind of stuff, sort of, and then once that kind of like exploded like in a lot of different ways where I was like, oh, I don't want that kind of thing. I had the opposite urge now where I'm like, I feel like I can like criticize things and kind of say what I think is good and maybe like chip in a bit here and there for different organizations or whatever. But like the idea of taking like a leadership role in that is just horrifying to me now. Like just like, I don't know. Like I feel like it's like the same thing about getting a big job at like a big corporation or something, where it's like, they'll always get more out of you than you get out of them kind of thing, and like they'll always like be able to use you for evil. Then I don't know. I also think that about like when I'm reading about like spy stuff or like intelligence stuff, it's like that War Games movie, remember, where like the
only way to win is not to play.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like you just get sucked up in this dumb stuff that goes on. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Just imagine being like a billionaire and then still feeling compelled to get involved in this stuff. Like, what kind of mental sickness what's wrong with you? Go enjoy your money. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I always think that whenever people are talking about like grifts or heists or something like that, like where they're like, people always have this thing where they steal like a few $1 million from this thing and then they just keep doing it. I'm like, if I got like $3 or $4 million, I'd be like, that's it. I'm done. Like I wouldn't be like,
I'd like to think so. Yeah. Same here.
You know what I mean? Like I think that most of the best criminals in history probably just never were heard of, or it was like one of those things where like 10 years after they died, some accountant was like, oh, look at that. And we got ripped off for $40 million. And that guy moved to the Bahamas and that just lived out the rest of his life. And
hey boss, you know that vault that we never go into?
Yeah.
Was there anything that was supposed to be in that vault?
Yeah, I don't know. I sometimes I think that for like intelligence stuff too, that like there must be, or like bureaucracies, there must be like whole bureaucracies that just like kill time kind of thing, you know, like just set up like whole sham operations and then just live out their days kind of thing. Not like, I don't know. But I guess the whole thing is like trying to be in the mix of it and trying to manipulate people and try to, I don't know. It's the same thing for like the super rich in terms of like abuse or stuff like that too. You're kind of like, well, if you had all this stuff, why would you risk it by raping someone or something like that kind of stuff, you know? Like, and then, so I guess it's just not a rational thing, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for those types of people, they want to feel fulfilled just like anyone else, and money alone doesn't really get that. But at the same time, you are like, you have to be invested in your wealth and stuff. Like, I think it's just such a huge, like, temptation, for lack of a better word. Like, it sort of defines who you are to such a large extent that it's like you kind of have to be the rich guy. You have to be the powerful person. And then you kind of just, you know, you find ways to make that real for yourself. And a lot, when there's no limits on your behavior, you can just buy your way out of anything, and you can get anything you want just by paying for it. You know, I think, you end up doing some pretty nasty stuff. It's really hard to just put yourself in the shoes of someone like that, you know, because I agree with everything you're saying. Like, it makes a lot more sense to just do one big hit and get out and enjoy yourself. But, you know, when you're in that position, like maybe doing that thing made you feel more alive than anything else. And and then, you know, you going back to just kind of like trying to lay low and just kind of like stay away from trouble and stuff. Maybe that just really sucks, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, we should be honest that most of what I'm saying here, I'm probably gathering from like Fast and Furious movies or something, you know?
Sure.
I'm like, you know, people do need one last heist or something. You know?
Yeah.
I don't know. But, that was something, something related that I thought we could talk about a bit, is like this whole, it's not just the vote thing. There's also this kind of impulse of you must have a complete political identity kind of thing. That doesn't have rough edges.
Yeah.
It's not just that you're voting one way or doing one thing or not voting, you know, because there is that kind of other counter thing of like militantly not voting kind of thing or something, you know. But, you know, there's that whole thing of, you know, you have to have like a list of almost like 2,000 factors or like ideas or something, and you have to have strong opinions on all of them. And you can't sympathize with other people who lay outside of that, and you can't think, well, maybe they're right about this and wrong about that or whatever, you know. So
yeah, in the future, we're all going to need to have like a fully laid out political platform for us as an individual, and it has to be all delivered in like a TikTok dance video. Like we're doing those goofy little dances, and when little captions pop up with, I believe in this and this and this.
Yeah. Yeah. I had some tweet like that too, where I was saying that, like, you know, you'd have, like, you wake up in the morning and you're like asking for your sustenance or something from your like computer in your wall. They'd be like, do you believe that everyone deserves healthcare or something like that? And be like, yes, I do. And they're like, your food pellet has been prepared or something, you know, like, just, it's funny now. I noticed it a lot in some ways with the coverage of the Amy Coney Barrett stuff for the Supreme Court, which wasn't that, I mean, that was just very boring because she just like some random dunce kind of person. But like, it was funny seeing a lot of the coverage where anything that was like a little bit off in any way, kind of people just like flipped out about, like totally out of proportion kind of thing. Like, like people were saying stuff like, I don't know, like she had like a notepad, right? And there was like a whole day of notepad discourse, and they were like, you know, like they were like, oh, she didn't write anything on it because she doesn't take it seriously because she hates the process or something. And it's like, I don't know, like is that really what you care about? Like, I don't know. And then she said stuff like that. They asked her about climate change, and you know, which again, I get that it's such it is an absurd position both directions, because it's like, one judge should probably not be what's standing in the way between us and changing things to fit global warming or something, you know, like, but it's partly her fault in some ways that's the case, kind of thing. I mean, like, but not enough that it's just a bad situation all around. But anyways, and she said that she like said, well, I don't know, you know, she basically wouldn't say that it was man caused or whatever, you know, human anthropogenic, whatever. because she just said she didn't know because she's not, it's like beyond her knowledge or something like that. Which is funny because saying that is like a signal in reality is like a signal to say that she's good enough on conservative stuff, right? Like it is like any reasonable person can look at it and say she's saying that because she wants to accept the fact that there might be doubt about climate change or whatever, so that she can rule in certain ways. That's fine. I understand that. I agree with that on the basic liberal angle on that. But at the same time, it's like you have to kind of, do you know what I mean? Like, it's this bizarre situation where it's like she refused to endorse particular scientific consensus on something, therefore she's incompetent and can't be a judge or something. It's like, I feel like if it's gotten to that point, it's just a bizarre debate. Like it's a very strange thing. And there was a bunch of examples like that where she kind of gave an answer that, and people had to be like trying to make it like, oh, she's incompetent or unqualified because, and it was just because she had a different opinion or something and wasn't really probably well thought out, because it's like, you know, right wing kind of nonsense or something. That's fine. But it's like the amount of anger that it generates, and the amount of like, it's funny because it's not just this is the last election in history kind of mentality. It's like this is the last anything that happens in politics is like the most ultimate thing now or something, right? So, yeah. And it's like, it's just, I don't know. I don't even think it's true for a lot of this stuff for the Supreme Court, where I think if there were a consensus in a lot of different ways, that they would be able to protect it, whatever it is, whatever issue. It's just that it's not just that the Supreme Court, it's just that so many other parts of the government are broken too or something. So I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah, I don't really know what's at stake. And
yeah.
I really doubt that it's anything. Like, I don't think Roe v. Wade's going to get overturned. I don't think the Supreme Court has much to do with climate change policies. I don't really know.
It's funny because it can do a lot of damage in a lot of ways, but it's more one of those things where other parts of the government blame it for it, kind of thing. Because it can also do things like, you know, the courts also ultimately helped legalize gay marriage and stuff. So there are already, it's not like all the way down the line that it has to go some direction or whatever. It's frustrating because that it's the same kind of mentality a lot of the time, where it's like it generates all of the instant takes kind of thing, where people have very, very strong positions on all of a sudden like judicial review, like whether or not judges can strike down laws and all that kind of stuff, immediately becomes like the most extreme. And it's like a polarization thing that's happening. I don't know. Matt Brunig and Liz Brunig talk about that a lot. And I find that really helpful of this whole like polarization stuff that happens online now, where, you know, people will have a particular perspective, and, you know, on Twitter and things like that, it's the punchiest, most flippant, most direct perspective that wins out a lot of the time in terms of debates, even though that's not true in real life kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true for identity as well, where, you know, for political identity, it's very, very common for people to just kind of settle into things like, it's very, very hard for them to settle into like more vanilla mainstream kind of personalities. It's almost always something that's like, oh, I'm not like, I'm not just Catholic. I'm some strange, like, I don't think the Pope is real and all that kind of stuff, you know, like,
right. Some kind of ist or ism.
Yeah. And, you know, there's sometimes that I think about like saying that, like, I just don't want to talk about a lot of that kind of stuff. I mean, I like on the podcast to be able to talk about it, but there's some things where I'm just like now where I just feel like how do I counter that in my own self? Like, how do I carefully sort of watch for myself not, you know, because that was something I did obviously for years. You know, I went very, very far in that direction in terms of being as flippant and as rude and as direct as possible. And that's fun. But it's like, how do you kind of, you know, how do you say what you actually think is true instead of what you think sounds funny or flippant or whatever? So yeah, I think that's part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot going on there. I think, this can be politics, it can be religious identity, it can be like all kinds of different things. It can be like your sexual identity. A lot of times I think people find like you can't be just like the default. You can't just be like, I don't know, I'm just like, you have to define yourself somehow. For some reason, like there's like this impulse to be like, I'm not just a normal person. I'm this, because being a normal person is like a non-existence or something. So you have to like define yourself as some sort of like thing that stands out from that. So like people start looking things up. They find out this like little political group in Italy in the 70s, or you know what I mean? Like they find some little thing that kind of like, oh yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable. I'm that. And, it has nothing to do with like what's going on in their life. It's like something they read on Wikipedia, and then on the internet, that can become like your whole thing. You can just talk about that all day. You can know all the ins and outs. You can come up with all these arguments against this other little group. You learn about them and why you hate them. And, you kind of like plug into this whole history that really has nothing to do with you. And like I said, that can go for like religious stuff, and that's even stranger because that goes back like thousands of years or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. And that was probably always the case to some extent in terms of people looking to reform things or looking to create new things, where there is that sort of tendency to try to draw on the past in very eccentric kind of ways.
Right. I mean, that's what the Renaissance was basically.
Yeah.
You know what this reminds me of? It's lessons. Our friend Alex, he posted something on Twitter recently that I thought was really, really good. It's from this guy, Alvin Gouldner, that he really likes to reference. I think he's like a Marxist, some kind of somewhat eccentric sort of guy, I guess. I don't know. I haven't read any of his stuff, but Alex really likes him. But he posted this quote, and it says, "In this negative dialectic, eternal repetition creates the illusion of development. There is an eternal youth killing an eternal old king who is eternally reborn and killed once again. In this negative dialectic, the youthful slayer never grows up, never grows old and ugly, never needs to be killed in his turn. This is the negative dialectic for those Peter Pans who never grow up but merely age. This negative dialectic is a Nietzschean fantasy unenlightened by Freud. It regresses to a pre-Hegelian romanticism of infinite yearning. It is lacking, therefore, in a transcendence of youth, for it has no vision of wisdom. It has little talent for existence in the present. Slyly hiding its pleasures, it embroiders them as dutiful rebellion." So I don't know, I kind of felt like that sort of captures the whole thing going on with like the you gotta vote kind of thing. You gotta pick a side, you gotta pick some little identity. You can't just do your thing. And it also sort of reminds me of some of the stuff we were talking about on a recent Patreon episode about like the usefulness of religious tradition, or just like tradition in general. I was talking to Tabs about this, about how like tradition isn't really like this. It's not like some canned, preserved thing that just like stays in stasis forever and everyone just kind of copies it exactly and precisely. And that the main thing is just to keep it exactly as it was or something. But I mean, it's important to maintain things over time, but tradition is like constantly reproduced in the moment. It's just by virtue of you living in a certain time and place in certain circumstances, you have to you necessarily are adapting it to those circumstances. So I don't know, I feel like because we don't have any sort of like established tradition in that sense anymore, these sorts of things take their place. Like the idea of like a civic tradition of voting kind of takes that place. And if you don't do it, it's like you're some kind of like heathen who refuses to sacrifice the lamb at the altar or whatever, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing like with the identity. You have to like decide who you are by finding a label, you can't just sort of like do your thing and let that define you. It sort of has to be like, my position on this is this, and my position on that is that, and then my enemies are this, and my friends are those. And it's just a really bizarre, it's like it's so abstracted from a real life thing that I don't know, I feel like that plays some sort of function in things. It kind of like puts it into the whole, it's like a theater production, it's like it's so detached from your life. And I think that's the whole point of it. Like, to go back to the Biden supporter person who I was talking about, they were really adamant about the idea of just voting because otherwise you're just giving in to the reality that you are powerless or something. But again, I mean, if you're powerless, you're powerless. You like doing a little kind of like ritual thing doesn't change that. So I don't know. I feel like all this kind of stuff is the same thing. Like, if you're just some person living a certain way, whether you call yourself an ism and all that kind of thing, like, that doesn't change what you actually are, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I sort of noticed this with the whole tradition thing. I sort of noticed this originally with the sort of Marxist stuff in terms of, I found that people were having the same debates over and over again that I felt like had already been settled kind of in some ways. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
they were kind of coming to things that had already been, and that's one of the things that really, maybe it's just like, getting angry at illogic or something. I don't know if that's even healthy, but people would say things that, they might say like defend the Soviet Union or criticize it, whatever. It doesn't matter either direction, but they would say things in a way that was inconsistent with their own tradition or something. Like, they would say things that somehow didn't really, like, it didn't line up in my mind. Like, they would say something that, or they would believe something about history that would be considered taboo or like offensive to people that actually were there or like supported that position at the time or something, right? So that was sort of the first thing on that. And then also sort of like a lot of the debates around the language and definitions and stuff, where it didn't hold together as a whole. Like, it didn't have a unity to it. I thought that, like, parts of Marxism did have a sort of very intricate unity, but it was one of those things where I just saw it, I felt like I saw errors all the time that I just, the thing that was interesting about that was that I could see how the sort of network effects, like all the people talking about it online, would teach each other the same errors.
Yeah.
And then those errors would become dogma. And then those sort of flowed into, and we kind of were saying about like how it's like Wikipedia definitions a lot of the time, stuff like that. And I think that's very true for things like it's stuff that is very, very true when you don't have any of that background in history or just tradition in general or something. Where, so the one that always used to bother me the most was social democracy and democratic socialism. And the Wikipedia Politics 101 definition is social democracy is, it's a formerly socialist kind of thing. Like, it might have been attached to it in the past, but it isn't anymore. And what it is it's you keep capitalism, but you make it more fair or something like that. And then democratic socialism is you get rid of capitalism, but you maybe have markets or something, or, it's somehow it's socialism plus democracy. But the other one is capitalism plus more democratic. And it's like, so anyways, that's just the basic 101 definition. The problem is that, like, if you went to, say, France or something like that, I mean, in France, they do have this kind of, like, I'm not saying that's like wrong as like a basic kind of thing that you can say, because that's how words work. Like, if they change their definition or whatever, that's just how it happens, whatever, right? But like, the interesting thing to me is that people would kind of like become bullies about it in a way, where they would say like, oh, you're talking about social democracy, not democratic socialism, or you're talking about democratic socialism, not social democracy, stuff like that. In other languages, in other places, most of the world, up until maybe the 80s, 90s or something, that definition just wouldn't make sense at all. Just people, that kind of like arguing about it wouldn't make sense. Like, I think it was like 1994 or so when Blair changed the definition of like the party membership for the Labour Party, and he changed it to say that we're a democratic socialist party. Like, in France, the Socialist Party is the largest social democratic party. So obviously, and in all of its documents and everything, it'll say we're democratic socialists and all that kind of stuff, right? All of these parties, in Europe in general, you would say, if you say I vote socialist or something like that, a lot of the time what you're saying is I'd vote for social democratic, whatever. It's just so very basic that that's true, and that democratic socialism, even as a thing, you've emerged as a way of identifying that you're a social democrat and stuff. It's funny because that it seems like a sidetrack there, like it seems like it goes off, but on a thing, but the importance of it is that like it's substituting these new definitions and these Wikipedia and very narrow kind of definitions to create these subcultures, basically, where
exactly.
And just to kind of cap that thought is that within the Marxist tradition, those two things were identical from the perspective of critique. Like, when Lenin is denouncing reformists and all this kind of stuff, he's talking about people who were Labor Party supporters or something like that, who called themselves socialists and were like, we want a planned economy and all that kind of stuff, right? Like, they weren't like, these things were much murkier and also much more like, there's a lot more to the debates than just what these kind of snappy Wikipedia infographic kind of stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and the Lenin example is perfect because he's talking about like specific people and specific groups with specific interests in a specific time and place, right? And that's the way politics really does work. It's like there are groups that, they do have like interests that are like they represent certain classes and stuff, but it's not like they just say, we represent the working class and then that's it. Like there's like actual like relationships built in there that there's some sort of like, I don't know, they help each other out in some kind of like actual real way. It's not just like we believe in this or that thing, and that's how a lot of this stuff works. And a lot of times you need to know all the ins and outs of those relationships among all the different groups and stuff to really get a picture of what's going on and, where you think you should contribute or not or whatever.
Sure.
And when you just kind of abstract this to the level of just like a certain tagline of dogma or whatever, or you kind of like just, it's like these brands are just like playing themselves out in some kind of cosmic battle that is like up in the heavens, and it's not, actual like conflicts between people on the ground and stuff.
Yeah.
And, that's where it's just meaningless. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. I think there's like a step that happens after that though, where there's like something I would call maybe like the grad student left or something like that, or like radical left, where like, if you read even a little bit about European history, you start to see that like the people who were leading socialist parties or like, democratic socialist sort of reformist parties, a lot of these places, they were the kind of people who would be like Hillary Clinton's or something, or Bill Clinton's or something like that, other places kind of thing. Like they're all
psychos.
I mean, it's not necessarily all of them. I just mean that like they, it's that like, there is that sort of thing where people think that, or even just, or communist parties or whatever, within their own society, they were thought of maybe as like stodgy old people or like opportunists and stuff. And it's interesting because it's like, I've kind of come to terms with the fact that like personality and self-positioning and stuff plays a huge role in politics, but that, not necessarily in a positive way. You know what I mean? It's like, that's just like an unfortunate reality. Like people have this, very, very complex, sort of like simplistic Marxist view sometimes where it's like, oh, well, that kind of person is radical because of this or that, because of their background or something. And in a way that it's like a one-to-one correspondence that is not really how it works. Like there's people always trying to betray someone or, we would never say that about like American politics now or something, right? Like we would always go, okay, that person is the kind of person who does this or that or whatever, like, I don't know. I think that's a big thing where personality and positioning and labeling and what can I get out of it? What can I, get for free out of it too? And instead of, just I could be positioned as radical even though I'm not or whatever, I don't know. It's a hard like problem because I saw some guy the other day saying that like Marxism has problems, but if you abandon it, you're just sort of adrift. And it's like, yeah, but maybe you are just adrift. I don't know. Like, like it's not,
Right.
doesn't mean that like, it just might not be satisfying, but it might be true. I don't know. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And just to bring it full circle, I mean, this is why I just can't get motivated to care about this, because if like I actually was trying to make real decisions about this, I have to get into all this mucky kind of stuff, and it's just like, there's nothing in this for me. So I don't know. It's fun to like talk about this kind of stuff and like just sort of look at it from a somewhat, I don't know if academic is the right word, but just like in a hobbyist kind of way, just looking at it just for the fun of it. You know what I mean? But like to actually get invested in all these different things, sure, I'd like things to go a certain way, but I'm not going to get involved with all these crazy people.
I don't know. I feel maybe a bit different in that, like, I don't want to put myself in a position where I can't just say what I'm thinking, Like, I wouldn't want to be in a position where I had to be like, like I wouldn't want to be on a party committee or something like that kind of stuff, or left-wing stuff, or like it's not that I don't want to be accountable. It's just that I want to be accountable more so kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like I want to be not accountable to other people's ideas as much as just being able to change, being able to say what I think exactly, not worried about that, not worried about fitting in or not. But I do think that like it's important for me to find ways to just to be able to like be mentally healthy with it kind of thing, like actually to find ways to sort of contribute in small ways. It's just getting the ideas out of my head in some respects kind of thing, like finding ways to just to stay sane and stuff. And the podcast helps with that because I can kind of, work through ideas and stuff. And that's true. And then, but I do think that like, and I enjoy writing stuff about it too, just because, I don't know, it just helps to clarify things and stuff. And that's something I want to do more in the future, is like actually like, instead of, I really enjoy being able to, talk extemporaneously. I don't know. Anyways, but about such things. But it'd be good to also just try to build some rigor into, writing out like detailed ideas that I think or something. I don't know. So
yeah, well, that's what the Pizzagate is real episodes are for.
yeah.
No, I think you're right though. I think that's kind of a good way to go about it. When you were talking about how it kind of builds these subcultures, this kind of behavior, I think, that's not necessarily like a bad thing. The idea of like building some sort of culture and contributing to that.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of like a necessary precondition to like having like a real movement that's any, positive in any kind of ways, to have like just like a generalized sort of understanding of like what the vision is, what the goal really is, so that all this sort of like little labels and for lack of a better term, identity politics doesn't kind of mess things up. So that people kind of are like, okay, well, this guy seems to be on the right kind of, he's got the right idea. I don't really know, a social democratic socialist, whatever. He's obviously on our team because, he kind of gets it. I think that's so much more important than like defining the little nitty gritty details and like kind of picking fights with people over like specific things when nobody has any control over anything. There's nothing at stake. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I don't know. Should we do some questions?
Sure. Okay. So someone asks from the Curious Cat, in the coming United States race wars, where does Islam stand?
That's tricky. That's kind of a little fight that's been going on within the community. So, like when Black Lives Matter was a big, people were looting like crazy and all that kind of stuff. There was a big debate about, was looting right or wrong? So there's sort of been like a left-right divide that it very much mirrors the liberal conservative culture war, like that generally kind of exists in the United States. And so there were people on the left that were saying like, oh, it's okay, it's fine. It's not obviously like the best thing to be doing, but, given the circumstances, you can't really blame these people, and, they're poor and they need things and all that kind of stuff. And people on the right were sort of saying like, well, you ruined someone's livelihood, you destroyed their store, you destroying property, this isn't right, this is against the Sharia and all this kind of stuff. And what you tended to see was that it's not explicitly like a racial divide, but you tended to see people who were like of Desi background, like South Asian background, and Arab background tended to be on the right wing side of things. And then black people and then like a lot of just like left kind of like people of college of the various diaspora, like Muslim backgrounds were, on that left side. And, so I don't think if there was some sort of like race war in the United States that you would necessarily see some kind of like united Muslim community. I think things would break down much more along like class and that kind of like culture war thing than it would, just like, oh, we're all Muslims, we need to stand together. I don't think there's that kind of feeling. Yeah. Which is unfortunate.
Yeah. I guess it would depend on whether or not the sort of white nationalist stuff was explicitly like Islam genocidal or not, or something.
Right. And that's where I step in. I unite the white nationalists with the Muslims and ride that to victory. I guess because that was, I think that as an outsider, I would think that they would side with black people almost immediately because there's just like that overlap of black Americans and Islam. But I guess that makes sense that it's much more tricky than that. So yeah, it's really unfortunate. Like there's even like in many places in the country, the mosques that people go to are different. Like you'll go to one mosque and it's obviously a black mosque. You go to another one and it's obviously Arab or whatever, like the kind of like immigrant community is,
Yeah.
And they just look at things differently. They have a different sort of history with Islam, a different sense of legitimacy, like what constitutes like legitimate leadership. There's it's not as clean cut as that. Like there's also like a Salafi presence in black communities where they put much more emphasis on like, oh, he went to Medina, he studied at Medina, so he's got the legitimacy to teach us about stuff over like local Americans. And then there's people who who are even American or even converts or whatever, and they kind of teach a more like traditional kind of thing, and it's complicated, but it's definitely not like unified is the main thing. I think things are probably getting better than they have been in over the decades, but it's kind of like a slow process, and it's definitely not like an ideal situation right now. It's one thing I like about the mosque that I go to is that there is like a big mix of people. Chicago in general seems to be pretty good about this. There's a significant Muslim population here, and you kind of get people who are very much like on one side of things and very much on the other, but they can kind of come together and like they do outreach and like volunteering stuff, and there's no like conflict over ideology or political views or anything like that when it comes to those kinds of things. Like I think that as far as these types of things go, I think Chicago is pretty good.
Yeah, that's cool. So the next question is, hey Donald, weren't you a libertarian once? If nowadays there is anything consistent about you, it is that your economic beliefs are really the opposite of that. Can you talk about the details of that change and how exactly do you feel about libertarian economics nowadays? I'm one of your Brazilian listeners, and even though the libertarian movement seems to have lost momentum in North America, it's thrived in the last 4 years in Brazil, with Bolsonaro even spewing some of their talking points, albeit with his very, very, very limited rhetorical capacity. So Leo mentioned this on the last episode that we did too on the premium. And so I thought it'd be good to maybe just talk about this for a minute. And I mean, the basic thing for the libertarian economic stuff is that the actual like far right libertarian economic stuff, I think, is just like straightforward, mostly kind of junk. It's almost like a lot of it is taking very mainstream arguments about economics and then making them seem like they're somehow magically definitive or something, and making them sound like like no liberal economics PhD person would be like, institutions don't really matter. It's just, you just have to like create markets, whatever, and then everything will work out. Like, we're kind of past that point, I think, in the last 20 years or so. But, you know, you get, it's just like anything else online. You get like, or like in the world where it's, a lot of it is like, you know, big money supporting it, just crackpot ideas and stuff. It's funny though, because I don't even know if it has gone away really in North America. I think it's gone out of our, I said this before, but I think it's kind of gone out of our circles. It's more people that are like maybe on Facebook or something, or just not online. Because if you look at the polls, I think that the libertarian candidate for president might get like a few percent of the vote. And that's not like nothing. That's like millions of people or something, right? Like that's like,
yeah.
And enough that they're going to go that far with it, right? So
I mean, it's more than a socialist candidate gets, right? I mean,
yeah. So, I mean, that's just they got to be out there somewhere. But I think a lot of them are probably part of subcultures that you just don't see reflected in a lot of the debates. I mean, they got to be people that are also not Trump supporters, right? Or like actively Trump supporters. So that's like kind of a interesting, strange thing, right? Like, where we think of like the standard kind of online narrative now is that all of those libertarian people became Trump supporters, basically. And I don't know if that's true. I think that there's probably a lot of people out there who have these kind of strange ideas about like the Federal Reserve is a dictatorship and all that kind of stuff, you know, like that is not really, it's sort of like, you know, the opposite of what Trump believes in some ways, kind of thing.
I mean, the thing about libertarians that a lot of people, especially on the left, don't like to really acknowledge is that you probably agree with them on about a good number of things. Like, a lot of them are opposed to like the police and the prison system and the wars and the military, and you know, a lot of them are really against that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And those are the people who would not be supporting Trump, right? Like, you know, there's this one podcast I've been listening to lately, and I have no idea why I enjoy this, but for some reason I do like listening to it. It's hosted by a libertarian guy. He's a stand-up comedian. But he does like, he has an explicitly like, I'm a libertarian, like he refers to himself as like an anarchist, and it's pretty much just straight political kind of like, what's the thing of the week to talk about. And it veers very close to just being like, you know, it's anti-Trump, but like, it's sort of basically like, he says all the things you would expect a pro-Trump kind of guy to say, basically.
Yeah.
But, I think one of the things I like about what he does there is that he sort of has his ideology and he has like his perfect utopian solution to everything, but he just kind of sets that aside as like, well, that's not going to happen. Like, we're not going to have like anarchist utopia. So like, there's no point in even discussing that as if it's a reality or whatever. And I think those are the kinds of people maybe that would fit into this like voting for a libertarian candidate kind of thing. It's just like, they just really believe in that idea and they really like it, and all the way down the line, right? Like all the way through. Like they truly believe in like, there's a problem with like police coming and like doing all this stuff, and they see Black Lives Matter or whatever protesting against that, and they don't like them, but that doesn't mean that changes their opinion about like the police and the military and whatnot. So it's I don't know, things are complicated, you know. It's not as easy as just like dividing things into by one line, you know. That's not really how things work.
Yeah, I think for me, what it was like when I was young, like when I was like 16 or so, I had sort of like DSA kind of beliefs kind of thing. I was like a young socialist kind of guy, and then I did read like a lot of the big libertarian stuff, like Ayn Rand and all that, and it was interesting to me because of how like it was so simplistic kind of thing that it seemed really like efficient kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Where it was like, oh, you know, this idea, you know, all the different property rights and all that kind of stuff. It was so efficiently laid out that I was like, oh, that's interesting. And it was more because I just had no experience with like actual political philosophy or anything. So it was like, this is very, very strongly stated and blunt and direct. So therefore it seemed like something I had to like reckon with. But the big thing I think is that people miss is that it's because a lot of the time socialism is just it's ruled out in your mind because of other things or something, right? Like, so you might read about like if you start to read a little bit about history in your teens and stuff, most of the time, maybe now it's different, but at the time you would read about like, you know, Stalin's dictatorship and all this kind of stuff, and you kind of go, okay, well, if that's socialism, I can't be a socialist. But,
Right.
But, you know, as you said, you see things in the world and you're like, man, the military's crazy. We waste all this money on it. Oh, look at how bad the drug war is, especially at that time. Like, it was a big topic back then, but like,
Right. Yeah, that's a big one for libertarians.
And so you just think to yourself, well, if we just did less of all of these things, that might be enough to help solve a lot of these social problems. Now, that, I mean, part of that is obviously personal inexperience with those kind of problems or whatever, right? Like, you can have a simplistic solution to a lot of things just because you don't know what it's actually like or whatever. I think that's true for social like poverty and stuff, right? Like, you just kind of
Yeah, I mean, that's probably true of 90% of people's political opinions about anything, right? Like, you don't have you can only have that much life experience.
Yeah. So anyway, so I think that's why I think it is very, very powerful in terms of I don't know. I do think of it now almost like as a virus or something. I guess Samir Amin had that like book called The Liberal Virus or something. And I almost think of it that way sometimes now, where it's like it can sort of preys on the faults and the problems with socialism or something is or like, you know, like it offers very, very sort of simple rebuttals to that kind of stuff. But I don't know. It's like, as you said, like there's lots of things you can kind of just talk with people about that have those kind of views still or whatever. Like you can, you know what I mean? Like there's lots of common ground you can find on different things and stuff. I don't know. I think that right now the conflation of libertarians and the entire right with the sort of online bully far right is not true. I don't think that's, you know, they might be willing to block together in a lot of cases, but I think there are still millions and millions of people who don't fit neatly into that pro-Trump ecosystem or whatever, like all the way down or something. So, like, I don't think it's just all alt-right people trying to be bullies online. I think there's probably just a lot of people who are not hyperactive in the most obvious ways kind of thing. They're more, you know, just living their lives kind of thing and have a little bit of this, a little bit of that kind of stuff. And maybe a lot of that is libertarian. Like someone like Doug Stanhope, I always think of as like a, you know, he's like a big libertarian guy. And, you know,
well, he kind of like walked that back, right?
Well, I didn't know that he walked that back. I just knew about
I heard him. I forget where I heard him talk about this. Maybe it was a podcast or something, but he was saying like, you know, people I came out as like a libertarian and kind of liked a lot of their ideas about like, you know, people just doing what they want and not having laws preventing you from doing anything if you're not harming other people, that kind of thing. He's like, that sounded pretty good to me. But then like I went to these like the conventions and stuff and people are just crazy and, you know, they're all defending all these like corporations and stuff. So like, yeah, I'm not really that into that anymore. And I honestly didn't really know what the word meant. Like, I just like the idea of like people leaving me alone, you know. I think that's probably a good part of like the whole libertarian thing is like you may not have a lot of contact with like other kinds of, you know, just with like political life in general. So you just kind of hear about something where it's like, yeah, do you like being left alone and not being bothered about things? Like, yeah, I do. And maybe you would otherwise sort of like agree with a lot of like kind of the mainstream sort of like just inherited wisdom about like freedom and democracy and the economy and that kind of stuff that kind of tends to be right wing. But you also like don't buy into the whole like Christian conservative kind of cultural stuff. Maybe that you really bristle strongly against that. Well, like libertarianism is like tailor made for you.
Sure. Yeah. So anyways, that actually even plays in more into what I was going to say. I was going to say that like there's lots of people like that who just seem like reasonable people. I don't know. I don't think you have to kind of shut out people from discussions or whatever, or like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a lot of common ground you can build with people that are sort of just, you know, pulled into different, I mean, just for myself personally, like, I think that you can kind of you know, people can, you can meet people at different points in their lives than where they'll be in a few years and stuff too. I don't know, you know,
Sure.
like, you know, so like, I always try to think that now too, where it's like, I mean, there's so many people online that I've met that I would never have expected that we could have become friends if I had met them online in like just walking down the street or something, right? So,
Right.
just totally different experiences from mine or whatever. So,
Yeah, David Duke is actually a pretty nice guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing about that is, like, if you are a American or Canadian socialist, like an actual, like, Marxist socialist, and you're not willing to kind of let people have goofy political ideas and still talk to them, like, you got to understand what are if other people are willing to talk to you about politics and stuff, even if you think you got it all figured out, like, think about how the other person is, like, how much respect and kind of like latitude they're giving you if they know that you're like a Marxist, and given like how they probably think about that. You know what I mean? Just kind of extend the same respect. I don't know. I always kind of come back to that these days. It seems like people just don't do that anymore. Like, they kind of have their camp, they have their political ideology, and like anyone who doesn't either agree with them 100% or at least accept their like superiority over all things is just like some kind of like morally evil person. Like, they're committing a moral failure by not accepting your superiority. Like, just kind of like realize, like, maybe you know better than everyone else in the room. Okay, maybe that's true, but like, they don't know that, so they're respecting you by letting you like kind of have like a talk as peers, you know, so do the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought I would quickly answer this one just because it says, "Sirs, can Donald please be more like his Bad News Hughes persona on this podcast?" We had talked about this a bit in some way, about that, like finding more ways to be goofy maybe on this one. I don't know. Or like, you know, like I don't know. I like that I can kind of just come here and just say exactly what I think honestly and just work through the things. But I do think that there's like, I don't know. People like when we kind of joke around with Leo and all those people, like, you know, me and John and other people. I don't know. I'm not sure what yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my idea was that we would interview Bad News Hughes, like Don, like normal Don, and I would interview Bad News Hughes, so he would have to play both sides of that, and that's kind of getting maybe a little bit above our podcasting level to do something like that.
yeah.
But it was just like a funny idea I had when I was listening to his intro on the last thing that he did.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny because most other podcasts, I don't know, like that I listen to, tend to be very, very self-deprecating all the way through, like, you know, like saying stuff like, "I can't believe people listen to this," and you know, going on and on about how the listeners are dumb or something, or like these people will listen to anything or something, you know. And I always felt like it just was not. It was rude to do that for us, kind of thing. I really like it when other people do it, but I always kind of felt like, oh, maybe we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't, like, because once you do that, you kind of lean into it a lot. I find, like, that's just like a thing that people do. So I think that we've mostly not done that kind of thing, even though we are a pretty shoestring operation kind of thing, you know. But like, so I don't know. Maybe we'll get some feedback on that. But do you think that we should openly admit constantly that the quality is not perfect? That's what we'll. Just type in. I don't know.
I always feel like that's a little bit like when people do that, they're sort of being. It's not. They don't really believe it or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just like I just like, just drop the act. Just do. You know, if you're going to put in the effort to put out a podcast, you're obviously trying a little bit. So just do a good job. I don't know. I feel like I want to respect the audience's time with something like this. If they're going to listen to something for like an hour and a half, whatever, like, it should be somewhat worthwhile. And I hope that it is. It seems like enough people sort of like the show and listen to it regularly that we're doing something good here. So I don't know. That's fine. I don't think we're solving all the world's problems and, you know, blowing anyone's brains or anything. But like, I don't know. There's no reason to like play that kind of goofy stuff.
Well, I mean, I grew up with people like Letterman and Conan O'Brien who just did that for 90% of their shows.
Yeah.
And I did love that. But yeah, I don't know. It doesn't feel authentic in this moment, so I just won't do it. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's our thing of being authentic in the moment. That's our motto. That's our corporate motto there.
Sure.
All right, let's try this one. I've recently lost one of my left hand's fingers in a kitchen accident. Upon losing it, I immediately tossed the severed finger into the fire and left it lit until said finger had burned into a crisp, as I'm offering to the Almighty, for I had used that finger in that hand to commit sin. Does this offering or sacrifice make me a pagan, sinner, or a holy man in the eyes of the only true Christian or even Muslim God?
Well, I mean, part of it is that you already lost it, I think, in an accident, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of like you're just disposing of it. It's more disposing than sacrifice kind of thing. Like you'd have to, so you might want to cut off another finger if you're going to actually make it like a sacrifice kind of thing. Yeah, and I think that, I think in the Bible, there's like that phrase that says something like, if your left hand offends thee, cut it off or whatever or something. So, so you got some biblical backup there.
And in Sharia, like if you steal something with no justification, your hand is cut off. But that would just absolve you of that sin. So that wouldn't make you like some kind of holy man or a sinner or a pagan or anything like that. That just means like whatever sin you did, you're off the hook for it.
Yeah. I guess the idea is that you could have had it reattached maybe or something if you didn't get it burned to a crisp. But I don't know. Yeah, I think that you're sort of out of luck here. You didn't really gain any favor, I think, from this. If anything, God probably wants you to be a bit more careful at work. I don't know. So.
Right. Yeah. It's also a bit wasteful. You wasted good finger meat. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
So God hates waste.
Yeah. Are Muslims cannibals? Like asking it as if it's like a real. Okay. hey, Tom, have you ever encountered this? The eating of flesh by your brethren or something? Oh, I heard that the devil Mahound was encouraging your. Yeah. Okay.
Is it true that Mohammedans have blue skin? Is that true?
Yeah. Okay.
All right, we can do this one. Do you boys like Black Sabbath? I like Black Sabbath well enough, I guess. I don't really listen to them a ton, but some of their songs are really good. I don't know, just like the classics, War Pigs and all that. Mm-hmm. I learned what War Pigs are, like the real historical, that's a historical reference. I mean, I don't know if this is what they were intending, but there was a thing called War Pigs, which was like militaries back, this is, I think goes back to Roman times, but I think it goes through medieval. They used to take pigs and cover them in pitch and stuff like that, tar, and set them on fire and let them loose on the fields of battle. And that was especially effective at scaring war elephants, because the pigs would just be squealing and going crazy and obviously spreading fire everywhere. So that's horrifying.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I don't know. Who was the guy that came up with that? I don't know.
Right. Some general's crazy cousin Larry is Larry has this idea. I don't know. Seems like it might work.
Yeah. Wow.
Give it a shot. We got a couple pigs. What's a couple pigs? Let's just give it a shot.
Yeah. And it's like someone writing home, whatever. My dearest Martha. Oh, yeah. I greased up some pigs and set them on fire today. That's my job in the war.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, that's funny. Pigs play a big part in Deadwood, which I'm watching now.
Oh yeah.
Where they the Chinese guy that the guy that's the lord over the Chinatown in the camp, Wu, he has a bunch of pigs and he keeps them there so that whenever someone gets shot or something, they just take the body to the pigs and the pigs eat them. And I don't know, it's very funny. The whole show's great. We're gonna have to do an episode of it one day when I'm done. And I'm probably gonna be done this week, so we'll maybe do that soon. But like I don't know, there's so many good things in it where they just lean into it. Like I love the parts with the Chinese people in it, because it's like really, really like them being like extremely racist back and forth kind of thing, but like in a way that's just like obvious, like it's just part of their lives kind of thing. It's not like it's not showy. It's just like he just like whenever Wu comes over to Swearengen's office, like the kind of like main character guy kind of thing, he doesn't know much English at all, so he just like yells in Chinese, very like a few words here and there. I don't know. It's very entertaining to me, but like, because it's like they just spend like 5 minutes trying to figure out what's going on, kind of thing. I don't know.
The more things change, the more things stay the same. You know.
Yeah. So, anyways, so that'll be our teaser, I think, for what's coming up on the show is talking about a 10-year-old program that is racist or something. So
yeah. I never really watched through that. I watched the first couple episodes, and all I remember is they just say cocksucker a lot.
yeah, they do. Yeah,
that's good.
It's one of those things where it kind of builds. It builds where like it's just TV. You know what I mean? It's just like it's just like perfect kind of one of those shows kind of thing where it's just like you kind of get to know the characters, and then they're so like ingrained in your brain that like eventually you just like, it's like you're just living at the camp with them or something, just like sitting there being like, oh yeah, I don't know. And I don't know, there's all lots of little funny things that they have to do in the show too, which just kind of like you get used to after a while, that are just so funny that like, I don't know, like Al Swearingen, he's always on his like balcony kind of thing, just talking to people. But what they do in the show to like make it work is that like a lot of the show is done on like green screens and all this kind of stuff, or like something like that, where he'll just be like talking to people and like looking down at the street, and he'll just like say something like, you know, you need to go over there and buy me a shovel or something, you know, just like whatever. And then the people in the street are like looking up towards him and talking, but it was obviously filmed at like different times and different things. You know what I mean? Like they just, and that happens so often that it's like almost like a joke at this point kind of thing. I don't know, but I love it. I don't know. It's great. It's one of my favorite TV shows, but yeah. So anyways, I'm trying to get more into it. It's funny because of like anxiety and stuff, it's hard for me to actually like just sit there and like watch something. It's like, it feels like I'm doing like difficult work or something. Like it feels like I'm just sitting there being like, okay, I'm watching this, I'm paying attention, this is happening now, kind of thing, or something, you know. And in the last few weeks, I've been able to kind of burn through a lot of different movies and stuff and shows. So it feels like I don't know, it feels like I'm getting healthier or something. So that's good. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, but like because it's still content. It's still just absorbing screens, but
right.
I don't know. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah, I've been mainly watching when I'm not playing Crusader Kings, I'm watching like YouTubes about battles from that time period. So like today I watched about like the Norman conquest of Sicily, and the other day I watched like a 2-hour thing about the early Muslim conquests of them like taking over like parts of Iraq and Syria and stuff, and it just like breaks down the specific battles and kind of like some of the background about why things went the way they did and stuff. And they're pretty entertaining and interesting and informative and stuff. So yeah, I don't know. That's what I've been watching. And British Bake Off, when that's coming, that recently started back on. So
oh really?
Once a week I've been watching that. Yeah. Tabs and I like to watch that together.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we leave it out there for this week then? Unless there's another one you wanted to do, or
nope, that sounds good. Yeah, we can leave it there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, thanks for listening, guys. And if you enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more of us, you can subscribe to our Patreon for $5 a month at the normal level. And you also are able then to talk on our Discord with our Discord community and the goofballs that enjoy having that space. So thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right, thank you. Bye.